The text arrived at 11:58 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was still at my desk when my phone lit up. I'd been reviewing Q3 projections for a logistics contract my firm had just secured, a $3.2 million government deal that had taken 11 months to close. I was tired in the good way. The kind of tired that comes after you've built something real. Then my phone buzzed. Dad, I disown you. You are dead to this family. Don't call your mother. Don't call your sister. Talk to my lawyer if you have anything to say. You are no longer my daughter. I read it once. Then I read it again. I set the phone face down on my desk and sat with it for about 30 seconds. Then I picked it back up, opened the message and typed one word. Me okay. I sent it. Then I opened my banking app. For 6 years, since the month I landed my first real consulting contract at 24, I had been quietly, consistently and completely anonymously funding my family's life. Not because they asked. Not because they knew. Because I loved them and because for a long time I believed that love meant absorbing the weight of people who couldn't carry their own. I had been wrong about that. It had taken 6 years and one midnight text to finally understand it. I scrolled through my scheduled transfers. $2,800 per month to the mortgage servicer on my parents' house on Clearwater Drive. $487 to the utility company. $612 to the auto loan on my mother's Lexus. $1,100 per month directly to Westfield University, where my younger sister Danielle was completing her junior year in communications. There was also a $300 monthly transfer to a grocery delivery service I'd set up under my mother's name 3 years ago when her back problems made shopping difficult, and a $150 monthly transfer to a lawn care company because my father had developed knee problems and couldn't manage the yard. All of it. Every line item. Scheduled, automatic, invisible. I canceled every single one. Then I closed the app, turned off my desk lamp and went to bed. I slept better than I had in months. To understand what that midnight text meant, you have to understand what the 6 years before it looked like. I grew up in a household where success was something that happened to other people's children. My father, Gerald, worked for 22 years as a mid-level operations manager at a regional manufacturing company. He was competent, steady, and deeply convinced that the world operated on a fixed hierarchy, and that our family existed somewhere in the lower middle of it. Not poor. Not rich. Comfortable enough to be proud, not successful enough to be generous. My mother, Patricia, taught elementary school part-time and spent the rest of her energy managing the social architecture of our extended family, who was invited to what, who had said what at whose birthday party, whose children were doing well and whose were an embarrassment. She was gifted at it. She kept detailed mental tallies of every slight and every favor, and she never, ever let a debt go uncollected. My sister Danielle was 4 years younger than me and had been, from birth, the family's designated golden child. She was prettier by conventional standards, more socially fluent, and far more willing to perform the version of herself that our parents wanted to see. He got the praise. He got the patience. She got the benefit of every doubt. I was the one who asked too many questions. The one who disagreed at dinner. The one who chose a business degree over education, who turned down a stable teaching position to take an unpaid internship at a consulting firm, who moved to a different city at 23 without asking permission. My father called it foolish. My mother called it selfish. My sister said nothing because Danielle had learned early that silence was the cheapest way to stay in everyone's good graces. When the consulting internship turned into a junior analyst position, and the junior analyst position turned into a senior associate role, and the senior associate role turned into a full partnership stake in a boutique federal contracting firm, I said nothing to my family. Not because I was ashamed. Because I had watched very carefully how they treated money and the people who had it, and I understood intuitively that telling them would change things in ways I wasn't ready to manage. So I said nothing. I kept my apartment modest. I drove a 4-year-old Honda. I wore the same rotating wardrobe of business casual pieces that I'd owned since my mid-20s. When I visited home, I brought groceries and cooked dinner and helped my father with paperwork he didn't understand. I was present and I was useful and I was, by every visible measure, doing fine but nothing remarkable. Meanwhile, quietly and systematically I was paying for their lives. It started the month my father was laid off. The manufacturing company restructured. His position was eliminated. He was 53 years old and had no meaningful savings because he had trusted a pension that was reduced to a fraction of what he'd been promised. They had 3 months of expenses in reserve. After that, the mortgage would go into default. I called the mortgage servicer directly. Set up a third-party payment arrangement. Told no one. Then the car payment. Then the utilities when my mother's teaching hours were cut. Then Danielle's tuition when she got into Westfield, and my parents sat at the kitchen table staring at the financial aid gap like it was a wall. I filled in every gap. Anonymously, systematically, without a single word. I told myself I was protecting them. That I was giving them stability while my father rebuilt, while my mother's hours recovered, while Danielle finished school and launched her own life. I told myself it was temporary. 6 years is not temporary. 6 years is a choice. And somewhere in the middle of it, the choice had calcified into an expectation. On their part, even though they didn't know I was the source. They had simply come to believe that things worked out. That gaps closed. That the mortgage always got paid and the lights always stayed on and Danielle's tuition always cleared somehow. And because I had given them no reason to look for an explanation, they had filled the void with the only logic available to them. They believed they were managing fine on their own. By the time my father sent that text, my firm, Hargrove Federal Solutions, had secured 14 government contracts over 5 years totaling just under $19 million in cumulative revenue. I held a 34% partnership stake. We had a team of 22 full-time employees and 3 federal security clearances. Our largest active contract, the one I'd been reviewing that Tuesday night, was a $3.2 million logistics optimization project for a regional Department of Transportation hub. I had a personal net worth, conservatively valued, of approximately $2.3 million. Liquid assets of $840,000. A real estate portfolio consisting of 2 rental properties in secondary markets generating $4,100 per month in passive income. None of my family knew any of this. What they knew was that I worked in consulting, which my father had long ago filed under the category of not a real job. And that I lived alone in a city 2 hours away and came home 4 or 5 times a year with groceries and a quiet disposition. My father had said at various points over the years that I was drifting, that I was wasting my potential, that I should settle down and find stability. My mother had, on at least 3 separate occasions, suggested I consider moving back home so I could stop spending money on rent I can't really afford. My sister had once asked, in a tone that was almost kind, whether I needed help finding a more stable career path. I had smiled through all of it. I had nodded. I had said things like, "I appreciate the concern," and "I'm doing okay," and "things are going well enough." I had documentation of all of it, not because I planned to use it but because I am, professionally, a person who documents everything. Meeting notes. Emails. Text threads going back 4 years. A private folder on my encrypted hard drive labeled simply, Family. I had not opened that folder with any intention of using it. Until the text. The fight that produced my father's midnight text had started 3 days earlier on a Saturday at my parents' house. I had driven up for what I believed was a routine weekend visit. My mother had called and said she wanted everyone together before Danielle's semester got too busy. I brought food. I arrived at noon. By 2 p.m., I understood the real purpose of the gathering. Danielle had applied for a study abroad program. Semester in London. The cost, above and beyond her standard tuition, was $14,000. Financial aid covered none of it. My parents had decided, apparently in a family meeting I had not been invited to, that I should contribute. My father presented this not as a request. He presented it as a conclusion that had already been reached. "We need you to cover the London semester," he said at the kitchen table, with my mother seated beside him and Danielle looking carefully at her phone. "It's $14,000. You can manage that." I looked at him. "I wasn't consulted about this decision." "We're consulting you now. You're informing me now," I said. "That's different." My mother's expression shifted. "This is your sister's future. She has an opportunity." "I understand that," I said. "I'm asking why the assumption is that I'm the one who covers it." What followed was 2 hours that I will not detail entirely because the specifics are less important than the pattern. The pattern was this. My family believed I owed them. Not because they knew what I had given, they didn't. But because I was the one who had left, who had built something separate, who had declined to need them in the visible ways they could catalog and reward. My independence in their accounting was selfishness. My self-sufficiency was a debt I owed them for the privilege of having built it. At some point my father said, "You've never sacrificed a single thing for this family. Not one thing." I thought about $2,800 per month for 6 years. I thought about $1,100 per month to Westfield University. I thought about the total, which my own accounting spreadsheet had calculated at $347,200 over 72 months. I said, "I hear you, Dad." And I drove home. 3 days later came the midnight text. I did not act impulsively. I want to be clear about that. After I canceled the transfers and went to sleep, I spent the following day doing two things: working and preparing. I called Marcus Webb, my firm's outside counsel, who had also handled 2 personal legal matters for me over the years. I explained the situation in broad terms. He advised me on my documentation, confirmed that all payments had been made voluntarily with no legal obligation, and prepared a single letter, not a threat, just a factual summary, that I could produce if needed. I called my accountant, David Osei, and asked him to pull the complete transfer history going back to the first payment in January of year 1. He compiled a clean summary document. Every transfer, every amount, every date, every recipient account. Total, $347,200. Organized by category. Mortgage, $201,600. Utilities, $35,064. Auto loan, $44,064. Tuition, $52,800. Supplementary household expenses, $13,672. I printed 2 copies and placed them in a manila folder. I also pulled the credit report I had ordered 18 months earlier, when I noticed an unfamiliar account appearing on my profile. I had not acted on it at the time because the amount was manageable and I had not wanted conflict. The report showed a credit card opened in my name in 2021. I had never applied for it. The account carried a balance of $11,400. I knew from the billing address on file exactly who had opened it. I added the credit report to the folder. Then I waited. I did not have to wait long. 41 hours after I canceled the transfers, my mother called. I let it go to voicemail. She called again. I let that go too. On the third call, 11 minutes after the second, I answered. "Hello, Mom." The mortgage company called. Her voice was high and strained in a way I had never heard before. They said the payment didn't process. They said the account it was coming from was canceled. I said nothing. "There must be some mistake," she said. "Can you look into it?" "There's no mistake," I said. Silence. "What does that mean?" "It means I canceled the transfers," I said. "All of them. The mortgage, the utilities, the car payment, Danielle's tuition. Everything." The silence on the other end lasted 4 full seconds. Then, what are you talking about?" "Those payments come from," she stopped. I could hear her processing it. The realization arriving in stages like water finding its level. "That was you. That's been, for how long?" 6 years, I said. "January of the year Dad was laid off." Another silence. Longer. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I was taking care of you," I said. "The same way I've always taken care of you." Quietly. Without being asked. Without acknowledgement. Without once being considered when decisions were made about what I owed this family. "That's not fair." "Dad texted me that I was dead to this family," I said. "At midnight. After telling me I've never sacrificed anything for you." I canceled the transfers 40 minutes later. I heard her breath catch. "I need you to come home," she said. "We need to talk about this in person." "I'll come," I said. "But I'm bringing some paperwork." I arrived on Saturday morning. I had called ahead and asked that my father and Danielle both be present. My mother had agreed, her voice careful and controlled in the way it got when she was managing a situation she didn't yet understand. My father was in the living room when I arrived. He looked like a man who had spent 2 days beginning to understand that the ground beneath him was not what he thought it was. He did not speak when I came in. He nodded once. Danielle was on the couch. She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen from her before, something between guilt and calculation, trying to figure out which posture served her best. I sat down. I placed the manila folder on the coffee table. I did not open it yet. Before anyone says anything, I said, I want Dad to tell me out loud what he meant when he said I've never sacrificed anything for this family. My father's jaw tightened. I was angry. I know. Tell me what you meant. I meant, he stopped. I meant that you've always done things your own way. You left. You built your own life and you never looked back. I looked back every month for 6 years, I said. I opened the folder and placed the first document on the table. The transfer summary. Clean columns. Dates, amounts, recipients. This is every payment I have made to support this household since January 6 years ago, I said. The mortgage servicer on this house has been receiving $2,800 per month from my personal account since the month after Dad lost his job. The utility account has received $487 per month. The auto loan on Mom's Lexus has received $612 per month. Danielle's tuition at Westfield, $1,100 per month, every month for 3 years. I slid the document toward my father. He looked at it. He didn't pick it up. The total, I said, is $347,200. Over 72 months. My mother made a sound that wasn't quite a word. I didn't tell you, I said, because I didn't want it to change things. I didn't want you to feel indebted and I didn't want it to become leverage. I wanted it to just be what it was, me taking care of the people I love. I paused. But Dad told me I've never sacrificed for this family. And I've decided I'm done letting that stand. My father was still looking at the document. His face had gone through several expressions in the past 90 seconds and had landed somewhere that looked like a man standing at the edge of something very high. There's a second document, I said. I placed the credit report on the table. 18 months ago, I found an account on my credit report that I didn't open. A credit card opened in my name with a billing address registered to this house. I looked at my mother. Not accusatory. Just steady. The balance is $11,400. I have the application records, which were pulled using my social security number and my date of birth. The room was completely silent. My mother's hands were folded in her lap very tightly. I'm not filing a report, I said. I want to be clear about that. I'm not here to hurt anyone. But I need this family to understand the full picture of what the last 6 years have actually looked like. Because the version where I'm the selfish one who's never contributed is not the one I'm willing to accept anymore. Danielle spoke for the first time. I didn't know, she said. About the tuition. I didn't know it was you. I know you didn't, I said. My father finally picked up the transfer document. He held it in both hands and looked at it for a long time. I watched something move across his face, not just shock but something older and heavier. The slow, private collapse of a narrative he had built and lived inside for years. Gerald. My mother said his name very quietly. He didn't respond. Dad, I said. I don't need an apology right now. I need you to understand that when you sent that text, you were disowning someone who had been quietly holding your life together for 6 years. And I need you to understand that I heard you. I took you at your word. And I acted accordingly. He set the document down. He put his face in his hands. The room stayed quiet for a long time. The transfers are cancelled, I said. All of them. I'll give the family 60 days, which is more notice than I received when I was disowned at midnight, to make other arrangements. The mortgage servicer will expect payment by the 15th. I'd recommend calling them Monday morning to discuss options. I closed the folder. I stood up. I love all of you, I said. That has not changed and it won't. But I will not continue to fund a household that considers me dead to it. And I will not keep being the person who gives everything quietly while being told in front of the family that I've never given a thing. I picked up my folder. I'll see myself out. I drove back to the city that afternoon. By the time I got home I had 4 missed calls. 1 from my mother, 2 from Danielle, and 1 from a number I didn't recognize that turned out when I looked it up to be my father's attorney. I returned none of them that day. The following Monday, the mortgage company called my parents to discuss the missed payment and the cancellation of the automatic transfer. My mother called me immediately after. The bank says they can give us 30 days before they report to credit bureaus, she said. Her voice was different now. Quieter. More careful. We don't have $2,800. I know, I said gently. You'll need to look at your options. A refinance might lower the payment. Dad could speak to the servicer about a temporary forbearance while he finds new income. You're not going to help? Mom, I said, I've been helping for 6 years without a single acknowledgement. I'm not walking away from this family. But I'm also not going to be the invisible infrastructure of a household where I don't exist. She was quiet for a long moment. Your father wants to call you, she said finally. He has my number. He called that Wednesday evening. We spoke for 40 minutes. It was not an easy conversation, and I won't pretend it resolved everything. It didn't. But it was the first conversation I could remember where my father spoke to me without the armature of authority he'd always kept between us. He sounded like a man who had been shown a mirror and was still getting used to the reflection. He did not apologize for the text. But near the end of the call, in a voice that was rough and uncharacteristically small, he said, I didn't know what I had. I said, I know, Dad. Meanwhile, practical reality was asserting itself with no interest in anyone's feelings. Danielle called to tell me that Westfield had flagged her account for non-payment on the most recent tuition installment. She asked carefully whether there was any chance I would continue covering it. I told her I would pay the current semester in full. She was 3 months from finishing her junior year, and I wasn't going to derail her education to make a point. But I told her clearly that the arrangement ended there. When she returned for senior year, she would need to address funding through financial aid, a campus job, a loan, or a conversation with our parents about what they could now actually contribute. He thanked me. She sounded, for the first time in a long time, like someone who was understanding something real about the world. The utility company sent a non-payment notice within 10 days of the cancelled transfer. My mother called the grocery delivery service and discovered it had been in my name. She called me not to ask me to continue it, but to say quietly that she hadn't known. That she'd assumed it was some kind of promotional account she'd won. I told her it was fine. I suggested she switch to a local delivery app that offered senior discounts. My father began, for the first time in 3 years, actively looking for work. Not the passive, dispirited job search adjacent behavior he'd drifted through since the layoff, but actual calls, actual applications, a conversation with a former colleague about a part-time operations advisory role. He called to tell me about it. Not to ask for approval, just to tell me. Like he was reporting to someone who might find it worth knowing. I told him I was glad. I meant it. 3 months later, I drove back to Clearwater Drive for the first time since the Saturday with the folder. My mother had made dinner. She had not asked anyone else to bring anything, had not organized it as a strategic gathering with an agenda. She just made dinner and asked if I wanted to come. I came. My father was different in ways that were hard to name precisely. Not transformed, he was still Gerald, still proud, still more comfortable with silence than with words. But something in the architecture of how he held himself had shifted. He looked like a man who was carrying his own weight again, which is different from a man who is pretending to. He'd taken the part-time advisory role. It paid $2,200 a month. It wasn't enough on its own, but it was his, earned and real, and I could see what that meant to him in the way he sat at his own kitchen table. Over dinner he said something I had not expected. I want to pay you back, he said. Not looking at me directly, looking at his plate, but saying it clearly. Not all at once. I know I can't. But I want to start. I looked at him for a long moment. You don't have to do that, I said. I know I don't have to. He looked up. I want to. We agreed on a number. Modest, symbolic, more than practical, but real. A monthly transfer back to me from him that he set up himself. He showed me the confirmation on his phone like a kid showing a parent a report card. I told him it was good. He nodded and went back to his food. My mother had not mentioned the credit card account since the Saturday of the folder. I had not raised it again. The balance had, without discussion, been paid off. I saw the account close on my credit report 2 months after our meeting. I didn't ask how. I didn't need to know. Danielle came home for a weekend visit while I was there. She'd secured a part-time job on campus and applied for a merit scholarship she'd previously never bothered with. She told me about it at the kitchen table with a kind of no-nonsense directness that suited her better than the careful, performance-ready daughter she'd always played. I told her I was proud of her. She said bluntly that she should have figured this out sooner. I told her most people figure things out when they have to. We did the dishes together afterward. He washed, I dried. We talked about her plans after graduation. She had ideas, real ones that she'd clearly been sitting with for a while but hadn't felt safe to say in a family where grand plans were dangerous territory. I told her to say them out loud. That the only way to test an idea was to let it out of your head. She talked for 40 minutes. It was the longest real conversation we'd had in our adult lives. I drove home that evening with the windows down even though it was cold. I wasn't thinking about the $347,200. I wasn't thinking about the text or the midnight or the word I'd typed back. That had started all of it. I was thinking about my father setting up a bank transfer on his phone and showing me the confirmation. About my sister washing dishes and talking about her future like it was something that belonged to her. About the fact that sometimes love has to have edges before it can be received as love. That sometimes the most generous thing you can do for someone is stop absorbing the consequences of their assumptions. I had not done this to punish them. I had done it because my father told me I was dead to him, and I decided, for the first time in 6 years, to take him at his word long enough that he could discover he was wrong. He was wrong. We all survived it. And for the first time in a very long time, everything we had, all of us together, was built on something true.